The Kael'thran Empire stretched across 17 star systems, its crystalline cities gleaming under alien suns like jewels scattered across the cosmos. For 3,000 years, they had known only victory. Their armies moved like liquid metal across battlefields. Their ships cut through space with the grace of predators, and their weapons could crack planets in half. No species had ever successfully resisted them. No world had ever been retaken once claimed by their banner. Admiral HFY stood on the observation deck of the flagship Eternal Dominion, watching the blue-green marble of Earth rotate slowly below. The planet looked so peaceful from orbit, its white clouds swirling in delicate patterns across continents that seemed to pulse with life. Intelligence reports indicated over 7 billion inhabitants scattered across the surface in thousands of separate political entities. A fractured species, constantly at war with itself. It should have been the easiest conquest in Kael'thran history. The humans have responded to our ultimatum, reported Commander Veltar, his forearms manipulating the holographic display with practiced efficiency. His scaled hide gleamed purple under the ship's lighting, and his triple-jointed legs kept him perfectly balanced despite the ship's movement. They rejected our offer of peaceful submission. HFY's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. The sound echoed off the polished walls of the command center, where dozens of Kael'thran officers monitored their stations. Each was a masterpiece of evolution and genetic enhancement, standing nearly 8 feet tall with redundant organ systems and reflexes that could process information faster than most species could think. "Of course they did," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of certainty that came from 3 centuries of conquest. "Primitive species always choose the hard way first. Show me their military response." The holographic display shimmered and reformed, showing orbital scans of Earth's surface. Red markers indicated military installations, weapons platforms, and troop movements. Naval fleets repositioned themselves in Earth's oceans, while aircraft scrambled from bases across every continent. Nuclear silos opened like flowers blooming toward destruction. 7.3 billion individuals, Veltar read from the tactical analysis. Approximately 200 million under arms across various military organizations. Technology level roughly equivalent to our archives from the first expansion period. Primitive nuclear weapons, chemical propellants, and basic energy shields on their larger vessels. Another officer, her carapace bearing the deep blue markings of the intelligence caste, stepped forward. "Admiral, our xenobiological analysis is complete. The humans are remarkably fragile. Single heart circulation systems, limited redundancy in vital organs, and an average lifespan of less than 100 of their planetary cycles. Their bone structure cannot withstand impacts that wouldn't even bruise a Kael'thran child." HFY studied the readouts with growing confidence. Every metric confirmed what their initial surveys had suggested. Humanity was young, fractured, and technologically inferior. The planet held valuable resources, including rare minerals and an abundance of liquid water, but the inhabitants posed no meaningful threat to Kael'thran forces. "What about their space-based defenses?" he asked, though the question felt almost rhetorical. "Minimal," Veltar responded immediately. "Orbital platforms armed with primitive kinetic weapons and short-range missiles. Their most advanced spacecraft cannot achieve faster-than-light travel and are limited to their immediate stellar neighborhood. We could neutralize their entire orbital defense network in under 6 hours." The Admiral's attention returned to Earth's surface as the display zoomed in on major population centers. Cities sprawled across the continents like glowing neural networks, connected by transportation systems that seemed almost organic in their growth patterns. Millions of lights twinkled in the darkness where night had fallen, each one representing lives that would soon be under Kael'thran rule. "Begin the demonstration," HFY commanded. The Eternal Dominion turned its weapons toward a small, uninhabited island in Earth's Pacific Ocean. The plasma cannon charged with a sound like thunder rolling through the ship's hull, energy gathering in the weapon's core until it blazed like a captive star. When it fired, the beam lanced down through atmosphere and struck the island with the force of a medium-yield nuclear weapon. The landmass simply ceased to exist. Where solid ground had stood for millions of years, only bubbling seawater remained. The shockwave rippled outward in perfect circles, carrying the message to every human government and military installation that watched through satellites and monitoring stations. Broadcast on all human communication frequencies, HFY ordered. Tell them they have 12 of their hours to surrender unconditionally. After that, we begin targeting populated areas. As the message transmitted, the Admiral allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This would be over quickly, perhaps within a day or two. The humans would see the futility of resistance and submit like so many species before them. Their governments would squabble briefly over surrender terms. Their military leaders would recognize the hopelessness of their position, and their population would accept the inevitable. But something in the human response troubled him, though he couldn't identify exactly what. Their communications networks had exploded with activity after the demonstration, but instead of the panic and despair he expected, there was something else. Organization, coordination, purpose. Admiral, the intelligence officer called out, her voice carrying a note of confusion. The humans are not responding as predicted. Instead of government capitulation, we're detecting massive mobilization across all continents. Military units are moving to defensive positions. Civilian populations are being evacuated from major cities, and their industrial facilities have shifted to emergency production schedules. HFY's mandibles clicked again, but this time with irritation rather than amusement. They're in shock. Once they process what they've seen, rational thinking will return. Sir, there's more. We're intercepting communications between their various military commands. They're not discussing surrender terms or negotiation strategies. They're coordinating defensive plans and sharing tactical information. Some of their leaders are using phrases like acceptable losses and strategic depth as if they intend to fight a prolonged campaign. The Admiral turned back to the viewing port, studying Earth with new attention. Perhaps these humans were simply too primitive to understand the futility of their situation. Many species had required additional demonstrations before accepting reality. Show them another target, he decided. Something larger this time. One of their military installations. The weapons officer designated a naval base on the eastern coast of the largest northern continent. The plasma cannon recharged and fired again, turning several square miles of military infrastructure into a crater of molten glass. Ships, aircraft, personnel, and equipment worth billions of human currency units vanished in seconds. The response was immediate, but not what HFY expected. Instead of surrender broadcasts, human military units began implementing defensive strategies with remarkable speed. Fighter squadrons launched from bases around the world, not to attack the Kael'thran fleet directly, but to establish patrol patterns and reconnaissance networks. Naval vessels scattered from major ports to positions where they could conduct guerrilla operations. Ground forces dug in around major population centers and industrial sites. They're acting like they can win, Veltar observed, his tone carrying disbelief. Don't they understand what they're facing? The intelligence officer manipulated her console, bringing up intercepts from human communications. Admiral, we're detecting some unusual patterns in their response. Their military doctrine appears to assume extended conflict against a technologically superior opponent. They have detailed plans for asymmetric warfare, resource denial, and population preservation strategies. Impossible, HFY replied flatly. They've never faced anything like us. How could they have plans for something beyond their experience? Sir, according to our historical analysis, this species has been in almost constant warfare throughout their recorded history. Not just between major political entities, but thousands of smaller conflicts. They appear to have developed their military thinking through continuous testing against other humans. The Admiral studied the tactical displays with growing unease. The human response was wrong somehow. Every other species the Kael'thran had encountered had either surrendered immediately upon seeing superior technology, or had fought briefly with conventional tactics before inevitable defeat. These humans were doing neither. Instead, they were preparing for a war they couldn't possibly win, with the methodical efficiency of species that had been fighting such wars for millennia. Their leaders spoke of acceptable casualties in numbers that made even hardened Kael'thran commanders pause. Their civilians evacuated their cities not with panic, but with practiced precision, as if they'd done this before. "Begin ground operations," Zexhai ordered, pushing aside his doubts. "Deploy the first assault legion to their largest urban center. A few thousand casualties should bring them to their senses." The dropped ships launched from the fleet's belly like a swarm of metallic insects, carrying the most elite soldiers in the galaxy toward the surface of Earth. Each Kael'thran warrior was worth 100 ordinary soldiers, equipped with personal energy shields, plasma weapons, and armor that could shrug off most conventional attacks. As the first transports entered Earth's atmosphere, the Admiral watched with satisfaction. This demonstration would end the conflict. No species had ever continued fighting after witnessing Kael'thran ground forces in action. But even as he thought this, monitoring stations detected something that made his confidence waver. Human forces were not scrambling to defend their major city. Instead, they were implementing what appeared to be a planned withdrawal, creating corridors for civilian evacuation while establishing defensive positions that suggested they intended to fight for every building, every street, every room. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human military command." "Put it through." The holographic display shifted to show a human female in military uniform, her face grim but determined. Behind her, other humans worked at primitive computer stations while displays showed tactical information. "This is General Sarah Chun, speaking for the United Earth Defense Force," she said, her voice clear despite the distance. "Your demonstration has been noted. Our response is as follows. Earth will not surrender. We will fight you on the ground, in the air, in space, and in every shadow you cannot see. We will make you pay for every mile you take, and every life you claim. And when you think you have won, we will remind you that humans do not know how to quit." The transmission ended, leaving silence on the command deck of the Eternal Dominion. For the first time in 3 centuries of conquest, Admiral Zexhai felt something he'd almost forgotten: uncertainty. Below them, the lights of human cities continued to shine, and in those lights, 7 billion humans prepared for a war that would test everything both species believed about themselves. The Kael'thran had always been unbreakable. They were about to discover what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object that refused to acknowledge it couldn't when the first Kael'thran dropped ships descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars, their hulls glowing cherry red from atmospheric friction. Commander Thane K led the assault force aboard the flagship transport, his massive form secured in a harness designed for his species' unique physiology. Around him, 300 of the Empire's finest soldiers checked their weapons and equipment with the casual confidence of beings who had never known defeat. Target analysis confirms this is their primary population center, reported Subcommander Clixaray, her voice filtering through the combat communication system. Estimated 12 million inhabitants, major industrial infrastructure, and significant symbolic value. Once we secure this location, their morale should collapse completely. Thane K studied the tactical display, showing the sprawling metropolis below. The city stretched for hundreds of square miles, a maze of structures that rose like geometric mountains from the landscape. Intelligence had identified key targets: government buildings, communication hubs, transportation networks, and power generation facilities. Standard procedure called for rapid seizure of these critical points, followed by a demonstration of Kael'thran military superiority that would break the enemy's will to resist. "Remember," he addressed his troops, "these humans are fragile. Our standard weapons settings will likely prove lethal, so adjust your plasma charges to minimum viable force. The Empire wants productive subjects, not corpses. The landing was textbook perfect. Drop ships touched down in formation across strategic positions throughout the city, disgorging Kael'thran warriors who immediately began securing their assigned objectives. Their personal energy shields shimmered like heat mirages as they advanced, deflecting the primitive kinetic weapons that human defenders fired at them. But something was wrong from the very beginning. The humans were not where they were supposed to be. Instead of defending government buildings and major infrastructure, human forces had evacuated these areas almost completely. The few defenders they encountered fought briefly before withdrawing through what appeared to be pre-planned escape routes. Rather than the chaotic retreat Kael'thran doctrine predicted, the humans moved with disciplined coordination. "Commander," reported Sergeant Vextal from his position near the city's financial district, "we've secured the primary banking complex without resistance. The facility appears to have been systematically evacuated. Computer systems have been wiped, and all valuable materials removed." Similar reports flooded in from across the city. Every strategically important location had been abandoned in good order, with anything of value either removed or destroyed. The humans had given up their most important assets without a fight, which made no tactical sense according to Kael'thran experience. "They're drawing us deeper into the urban environment," observed Clixray, studying the pattern of human movements on her scanner. "But why? They can't hope to defeat us in close combat." Thane K paused at an intersection, his enhanced senses detecting something unusual. The city was too quiet. Streets that should have been chaotic with fleeing civilians were empty except for abandoned vehicles and scattered debris. Buildings that should have held thousands of humans showed no life signs. "Advance elements, report status," he commanded. "Squad 7 here. We've reached the government complex. Negative resistance, negative personnel. Building is completely empty." Squad 12 reporting. "Transportation hub secured. No defenders encountered. All vehicles have been removed from the facility." Squad 3 in position at power generation station. Site appears to have been shut down deliberately before evacuation. The systematic nature of the human withdrawal troubled Thane K. In his experience, primitive species either fought desperately to defend their territories or fled in panic. They did not implement organized strategic withdrawals that denied valuable resources to the enemy. "Sir," called out Private Zelhan from his position near a vehicle checkpoint, "I'm detecting movement in the subsurface areas." The humans appear to have extensive underground infrastructure. Before Thane K could respond, the world exploded around them. The detonation came from below, where human engineers had spent days preparing surprises for their uninvited guests. What had appeared to be a normal city street was actually the roof of an underground maintenance tunnel that human demolitions experts had packed with improvised explosives. The blast threw 3 Kael'thran soldiers through the air, their energy shields flaring and failing under the unexpected assault. Their armor protected them from serious injury, but the psychological impact was profound. For the first time in their military careers, they had been surprised by an enemy they had dismissed as primitively harmless. "Ambush protocol," Thane K shouted, but the humans had already vanished back into their underground networks before the Kael'thran could respond effectively. The pattern repeated across the city. Small teams of human defenders would strike from concealed positions, inflict minimal casualties, and disappear before Kael'thran forces could retaliate. They used the urban environment like a weapon, turning familiar streets into mazes where every building could hide threats. "Commander, we're taking sporadic fire from multiple directions," reported Subcommander Clixray. "The enemy appears to be using elevated positions in the structural frameworks of their buildings. Our sensors are having difficulty tracking them through the dense construction materials." Thane K realized with growing frustration that the humans had turned their own city into a fortress designed specifically to negate Kael'thran advantages. The tall buildings limited the effectiveness of aerial support. The underground networks allowed rapid movement without detection, and the civilian population had been removed to eliminate concerns about collateral damage. "Request orbital bombardment of grid sections 7 through 12, he commanded. Negative, Commander, came the reply from Admiral HFY aboard the flagship. Intelligence indicates the humans have dispersed their leadership and industrial capacity. Destroying empty buildings serves no strategic purpose and wastes ammunition. The reality of their situation began to sink in. The Kael'thran found themselves occupying worthless territory while the real value of human civilization had been moved beyond their immediate reach. They held empty buildings while their enemies controlled the initiative. Sir, Private Zelhan called out again, this time with urgency in his voice. We have incoming aircraft. The human pilots came in low and fast, using the city's skyline to mask their approach until the last possible moment. Their weapons were primitive by Kael'thran standards, but they had been specifically modified for this engagement. Instead of trying to penetrate Kael'thran armor directly, they fired specialized rounds designed to create maximum noise, confusion, and environmental destruction. Buildings collapsed across the street, filling the air with dust and debris that interfered with Kael'thran sensors. Fire spread from ruptured gas lines, creating thermal blooms that disrupted energy shield targeting systems. The humans were not trying to kill Kael'thran soldiers directly. They were trying to blind them, disorient them, and force them to fight on human terms. Fall back to defensive positions, Thane K ordered, but even as he gave the command, he realized the humans had anticipated this response as well. The routes they had used for their initial advance had been subtly altered during the fighting. Debris blocked certain passages, forcing the Kael'thran to move through areas where human defenders had prepared additional surprises. What should have been a simple tactical withdrawal became a complex navigation problem through an environment that seemed to shift and change around them. Commander, Clixaray's voice carried a note of something Thane K had never heard from her before doubt. Our tactical doctrine assumes enemy forces will attempt to hold territory. These humans appear to be implementing a strategy of territorial denial. They're making the city worthless to us while maintaining their ability to inflict casualties. As if to emphasize her point, another explosion echoed through the streets. This time, human demolitions teams had destroyed a major bridge, cutting off one of the Kael'thran advance units from their support elements. The isolated soldiers were not in immediate danger, but they would need to take a longer route back to friendly positions. Thane K studied his tactical display and felt a chill that had nothing to do with Earth's atmospheric temperature. The humans were fighting exactly the kind of war that Kael'thran forces were least equipped to handle. Instead of meeting them in open battle where superior technology and training would prove decisive, they had created a situation where every engagement favored the defender. Request immediate reinforcement, he transmitted to Orbital Command. Initial assessment was incorrect. Human resistance is more sophisticated than anticipated. Elaborate, Commander. Sir, these humans are not fighting like a primitive species. Their tactics suggest extensive experience with asymmetric warfare against technologically superior opponents. They have prepared their urban environment specifically to negate our technological advantages while maximizing their defensive capabilities. There was a long pause before Admiral HFY responded. Commander, are you suggesting that this species poses a legitimate military threat to Kael'thran forces? Thane K looked around at the burning city, where his elite soldiers were being systematically harassed by an enemy they rarely saw and could not effectively engage. Sir, I am suggesting that we may have significantly underestimated these humans. Another explosion shook the ground beneath their feet, and somewhere in the distance, human voices could be heard coordinating their next surprise. The Kael'thran had expected to occupy a city in hours. Instead, they were discovering that humans had spent their entire history learning how to make invaders pay for every inch of ground they claimed. The battle for Earth had barely begun, and already the rules of engagement were nothing like what the Kael'thran had expected. Admiral HFY stood before the assembled war council aboard the Eternal Dominion, his confident demeanor from days earlier replaced by something approaching bewilderment. The holographic displays around the circular chamber showed tactical updates from 17 different fronts across Earth's surface, and none of them contained the kind of progress reports he had expected to deliver. Ground forces have secured 0 strategic objectives, reported General Crowthon, his usually steady voice carrying undertones of frustration. Human defenders have evacuated or destroyed anything of value before our arrival. We control empty buildings and barren industrial sites. What about population centers? Asked Fleet Commander Yelsha. Surely we have established administrative control over their civilian populations? The silence that followed was more telling than any report could have been. The humans have implemented what they call strategic relocation, explained Intelligence Director Voxmira, her 4 hands manipulating data streams with nervous energy. Their civilian populations have been moved to locations that our scans cannot easily detect. Underground facilities, hardened bunkers, remote geographical areas with natural camouflage. Admiral Zexhai felt something he had not experienced in 3 centuries of conquest: confusion about how to proceed. Every previous enemy had followed predictable patterns. They defended their population centers, fought to protect their industrial capacity, and eventually surrendered when casualties became unbearable. The humans seemed to be implementing an entirely different approach to warfare. "Show me casualties," he commanded. The display shifted to show medical reports from ground forces. Kael'thran casualties remain minimal, reported the medical officer. 17 soldiers wounded, none killed. However, our combat effectiveness has decreased by 37% due to environmental factors. Explain. The humans are not primarily targeting our personnel. Instead, they are targeting our equipment, our sensors, and our communication systems. They use primitive explosives to create dust clouds that interfere with our visual targeting. They ignite chemical fires that disrupt our thermal sensors. They have somehow learned to jam our short-range communication frequencies using basic electronic equipment. Fleet Commander Yelsha leaned forward in her command chair. They're fighting our technology instead of fighting us directly. More than that, added General Crowthon, they're changing the battlefield itself. Bridges destroyed to limit our movement options. Roads blocked with debris. Buildings collapsed to create defensive positions. They're rewriting the terrain to favor their capabilities over ours. Admiral Zexhai studied the tactical displays with growing realization that his assumptions about this conflict had been fundamentally flawed. What about their military casualties? Impossible to determine accurately, Intelligence Director Voxmira admitted. Human forces operate in small units with high mobility. When we engage them directly, they suffer significant casualties but withdraw before we can achieve decisive results. However, new units appear to replace losses with remarkable speed. How fast? Sir, our analysts estimate that for every human soldier we neutralize, 3 more appear in the field within 24 hours. The War Council exchanged glances of disbelief. In their experience, primitive species had limited, trained military personnel. Heavy casualties should have quickly degraded their ability to field effective forces. "Where are these replacement troops coming from?" demanded the Admiral. "That's the problem, sir. We believe they're not replacement troops in the traditional sense. Intelligence suggests that human civilian populations include massive numbers of individuals with basic military training. Their society appears to maintain what they call reserve forces numbering in the hundreds of millions." General Crowthon activated his personal display, showing population analysis data. "Admiral, this species has been preparing for large-scale warfare their entire existence. Not just professional soldiers, but entire populations with basic combat training, survival skills, and weapons familiarity." "Impossible," Admiral Zexhai stated flatly. "No species maintains that level of military readiness without being in active conflict." "Sir," Intelligence Director Voxmira's voice was quiet. "They are in active conflict. Our historical analysis shows this species has experienced continuous warfare for thousands of years. They have refined their military doctrine through constant testing against other humans. What we're seeing is not desperate improvisation. It's proven strategy. The Admiral turned to study Earth through the observation port, its blue surface still rotating peacefully below the fleet. From orbit, it looked exactly like every other conquest target they had claimed. But the reports from ground forces painted a very different picture. "Give me specific examples," he ordered. General Crowthon pulled up combat footage from ground operations. Squad 6 attempted to secure a transportation nexus in the eastern continental region. Human defenders allowed them to occupy the facility, then destroyed the access routes. Our soldiers were not trapped, but they could not advance or retreat without significant effort to clear obstacles. Squad 15 engaged human forces near a major river crossing. The humans fought long enough to delay our advance, then destroyed the bridge and withdrew to positions on the opposite bank. Again, no significant Kael'thran casualties, but our operational timeline was extended by days. 3rd Battalion secured what intelligence identified as a major industrial complex. Upon examination, the facility had been stripped of all useful equipment, and the buildings had been rigged with delayed explosives. Our forces were forced to evacuate, and the facility was destroyed as they withdrew. Admiral Zexhai processed these reports with growing unease. "They're not trying to defeat us militarily." "No, sir. They appear to be trying to make conquest economically unfeasible. Every objective we secure requires more resources to hold than it provides in return. Every advance extends our supply lines while yielding no strategic benefit." Fleet Commander Yelsha highlighted orbital scans of human activity. "Admiral, we're detecting significant movement of human forces, but not toward defensive positions. They appear to be dispersing across the planet's surface, moving to locations where our orbital sensors cannot track them effectively. They're making themselves impossible to defeat decisively," realized Intelligence Director Voxmira. "We cannot destroy their military if we cannot locate their military. We cannot break their morale by targeting their population centers if we cannot find their population centers." The Admiral felt the first whisper of something he had not experienced since his youth: doubt about the outcome of a military campaign. "What do our projections show for complete planetary conquest?" The intelligence officer's hesitation was answer enough, but she provided the numbers anyway. "At current rates of progress, assuming no change in human resistance patterns, complete pacification would require between 18 and 24 months. Resource expenditure would exceed the economic value of the planet by a factor of 7. 24 months? Admiral Zexhai had conquered entire star systems in less time. "Sir, that assumes human resistance does not become more sophisticated as the conflict progresses. Historical analysis suggests these humans improve their tactics rapidly when faced with new challenges." General Crowthon activated another display. "We're already seeing adaptation in their methods. They've analyzed our weapons' signatures and begun using their primitive technology to create countermeasures. Metallic chaff to confuse our targeting systems. Thermal decoys to waste our ammunition. Acoustic devices that interfere with our communication frequencies. More concerning," added Fleet Commander Yelsha, "they're sharing this information rapidly across all their military units. Tactical innovations developed in one region appear in other theaters within hours." Admiral Zexhai stood in silence, processing information that challenged everything he knew about warfare. The humans were fighting like a species that had spent millennia preparing for this exact situation. Their tactics assumed they would face superior technology, overwhelming force, and the need to win through endurance rather than decisive battle. "Sir," Intelligence Director Voxmira spoke carefully, "there's something else. We've intercepted human communications discussing what they call Phase 2 of their defensive strategy." "What does that mean?" "We're not certain, but the references suggest their current resistance is only the beginning. They appear to have planned for extended operations that assume initial defensive failure." The War Council fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans were not fighting desperately to prevent defeat. They were implementing the opening moves of a strategy designed to function after conventional defeat. Admiral HFY looked once more at the peaceful blue planet below, and for the first time in his career, he wondered if the Kael'thran Empire might have encountered something it could not simply overwhelm with superior technology and military doctrine. The humans were teaching them that there were forms of strength that had nothing to do with the ability to destroy, and everything to do with the refusal to be broken 6 months in what was supposed to be a 3-day conquest. Admiral HFY stood in his private quarters aboard the Eternal Dominion, staring at reports that made no sense according to everything the Kael'thran Empire knew about warfare. Outside his viewport, Earth continued its rotation, but the planet below was no longer the same world they had first encountered. The humans had implemented something they called Phase 2. Admiral, came the voice of Intelligence Director Vox Mira through the communication system. You need to see the latest developments. HFY made his way to the Intelligence Center, where holographic displays showed a 3-dimensional map of human activity across the planet. What he saw defied every prediction their strategic computers had generated. They're attacking us, he said, his voice carrying disbelief. Yes, sir, but not in any way our tactical doctrine prepared us for. Instead of the defensive resistance they had expected, human forces had begun launching coordinated strikes against Kael'thran positions. But these were not desperate counterattacks by a failing enemy. They were systematic operations that targeted specific vulnerabilities in Kael'thran deployment patterns. Show me the details. The display zoomed in on a supply depot that had been overrun 3 days earlier. Human forces bypassed our defensive perimeter entirely by using their underground tunnel networks. They emerged inside our secured area, destroyed our equipment stockpiles, and withdrew before reinforcements could respond. How much damage? Approximately 40% of our ground forces' ammunition reserves for this continental region. The depot had been considered completely secure according to our standard defensive protocols. Admiral HFY studied the tactical analysis with growing concern. The humans had not tried to hold the territory they had captured. Instead, they had focused entirely on destroying Kael'thran resources and capabilities. What about the communication relay on the northern continent? Destroyed by human aircraft using kamikaze tactics. They sacrificed 3 primitive fighters to disable equipment worth more than their entire aerospace industry. The logistics base? Infiltrated by human special forces who planted what they call time bombs. Delayed explosives that detonated after our forces had reoccupied the facility. We lost 2 weeks' worth of maintenance supplies and equipment. The pattern was clear and troubling. The humans were not fighting to win in any conventional sense. They were fighting to make the Kael'thran occupation as expensive and difficult as possible. Sir, Intelligence Director Vox Mira continued, we've decoded additional human communications. They're referring to this phase as making it cost more than it's worth. Admiral HFY felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Elaborate. The humans appear to have calculated the economic cost of maintaining their resistance versus the economic benefit the Empire expects to gain from conquering their world. They're deliberately targeting that equation. The display shifted to show supply line analysis. Red indicators marked dozens of disrupted transportation routes, damaged equipment, and depleted resource stockpiles. Our operational costs have increased by 400% since the beginning of the campaign, the intelligence officer reported. Human attacks are specifically designed to force us to expend expensive resources while they use inexpensive weapons and tactics. Give me an example. Human forces will use a primitive explosive device worth perhaps 50 units of their currency to destroy a Kael'thran atmosphere transport worth 50,000 units. They trade cheap materials for expensive equipment in every exchange. General Crothon entered the intelligence center, his usually immaculate uniform showing signs of the strain of extended operations. Admiral, we need to discuss the tactical situation. What's our current operational status? Ground forces control approximately 30% of major population centers, but these areas provide no economic benefit. Human civilians and industrial capacity have been relocated beyond our effective reach. Meanwhile, our forces are under constant attack by an enemy we can rarely see and cannot decisively engage. Casualties. Human casualties are difficult to estimate, but certainly significant. However, their operational capacity does not appear to be degrading. If anything, their attacks are becoming more sophisticated and effective. Admiral HFY activated his personal communication system. "Give me the fleet, Admiral." Minutes later, the holographic image of Fleet Admiral Morthak appeared in the center of the room. His expression was grim, suggesting that he had been receiving similar reports from across the battle zone. "Admiral HFY, report on current status." "Sir, the humans have shifted to active offensive operations against our occupation forces. They are implementing what appears to be a comprehensive strategy designed to make conquest economically unfeasible." "Explain." "Sir, these humans are fighting like a species that has extensive experience with prolonged resistance campaigns. They seem to understand exactly how to maximize our costs while minimizing their own. Every engagement favors their capabilities over ours." Fleet Admiral Morthak was silent for several moments. "Admiral, are you requesting additional reinforcements?" "Sir, I am beginning to question whether additional forces will solve the fundamental problem. This species appears to have designed their entire military doctrine around the assumption that they will face superior enemies. More Kelthran troops may simply provide them with more targets." "Admiral," the fleet admiral's voice carried a warning tone, "are you suggesting that the Kelthran Empire cannot defeat a primitive species armed with chemical explosives and kinetic weapons?" Before HFY could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The bridge communication system activated immediately. "Admiral, to the bridge. Human forces have launched spacecraft toward the fleet." Admiral HFY and his staff rushed to the command center, where the tactical displays showed dozens of small objects rising from Earth's surface toward their orbital position. "Analysis?" he demanded. "Primitive spacecraft, sir. Single-pilot vehicles with minimal defensive capability. However, they appear to be carrying some form of explosive payload." "Weapon status?" "Sir, our defensive systems can easily destroy these craft. However, there are over 200 of them launching simultaneously from different points across the planet's surface." Admiral HFY watched the display with recognition dawning in his mind. "They're not trying to damage our ships. Sir, they're forcing us to expend ammunition and reveal our defensive capabilities. Every missile we fire costs more than the primitive craft we're destroying." As if to confirm his analysis, the human spacecraft began implementing evasive maneuvers that forced the Kelthran fleet to use expensive guided munitions instead of simple energy weapons. The humans were making even this desperate attack economically favorable to their side. "Admiral," reported the communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from the human military command." "Put it through." General Sarah Chun appeared on the display, her uniform now showing the wear of months of continuous operations. Behind her, computer screens showed tactical information and what appeared to be celebration among human military personnel. "Admiral HFY," she said, "I wanted to personally thank you for the extended field testing of our new tactical doctrines. Your forces have provided excellent opposition for our training exercises." "Training exercises?" HFY felt his mandibles clench with anger. "Oh yes, we've learned a great deal about fighting technologically superior opponents from your invasion. Our casualties have been acceptable, our tactics have proven effective, and our strategic objectives remain achievable. We estimate we can maintain current operational tempo for approximately 18 more months before requiring significant tactical adjustments." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Intelligence Director Vox Mira spoke quietly. "Admiral, I believe we have fundamentally misunderstood this species. They are not fighting desperately to avoid defeat. They are testing themselves against us as preparation for something else." "What do you mean?" "Sir, what if this is not their first contact with spacefaring civilizations? What if they have been preparing for this scenario because they expected it to happen eventually. Admiral HFY felt the last of his confidence drain away as he realized the terrible possibility that the humans had been ready for them all along. The Kalefron Empire had encountered a species that treated invasion by superior forces not as a disaster to be avoided, but as an opportunity to be exploited. And they were very good at exploiting opportunities. 1 year after the invasion began, Fleet Admiral Morthak stood in the war room of the Imperial Command ship Sovereign Destiny, surrounded by holographic displays that told a story no Kalefron commander had ever expected to witness. The assembled admirals, generals, and intelligence directors represented the finest military minds in the Empire, and every one of them looked like they had aged decades in the past 12 months. Final assessment. Fleet Admiral Morthak commanded, his voice carrying the weight of an empire that had never known strategic failure. Admiral HFY stepped forward, his report already transmitted but requiring verbal confirmation before the assembled leadership. Sir, Operation Earth Conquest has achieved none of its stated objectives. Human resistance has not only continued, but has evolved into something approaching a peer military threat. The silence in the room was deafening. Elaborate, commanded the fleet admiral, though every officer present had read the detailed analysis. Human forces have successfully transitioned from defensive to offensive operations. They have demonstrated the ability to conduct complex military operations against Kalefron forces across multiple theaters simultaneously. More concerning, they have begun adapting our technology for their own use. Intelligence Director Voxmira activated a display showing captured human equipment. Sir, human engineers have successfully reverse-engineered several of our systems. They now possess basic energy shield technology, improved communication equipment, and have developed countermeasures for our standard weapons. How was that possible? Demanded General Crothon. Their technology level is centuries behind ours. Sir, that assumption has proven incorrect. Their technology is different from ours, not necessarily inferior. They have demonstrated remarkable ability to innovate solutions to technical problems under extreme conditions. Admiral HFY continued the briefing. Human military doctrine has proven far more sophisticated than our initial assessment suggested. They have successfully negated our technological advantages through tactical innovation and strategic thinking that assumes prolonged conflict against superior opponents. Fleet Admiral Morthak studied the displays showing human military operations. What are our current casualty figures? Kalefron military casualties remain relatively low. However, our equipment losses have been severe. Conservative estimates suggest we have lost approximately 60% of our ground-based equipment and 30% of our orbital assets. And human casualties? Difficult to determine accurately, but estimated between 2 and 3 million military personnel and approximately 8 million civilians. Then we are winning. No, sir, Admiral HFY said quietly. We are not winning. The fleet admiral's expression darkened. Explain how massive enemy casualties constitute failure for Kalefron forces. Sir, human military capacity has not decreased despite their casualties. Intelligence suggests their active military personnel now number approximately 400 million individuals, an increase of 100% since the invasion began. They have transformed their entire civilization into a military organization. Intelligence Director Voxmira brought up population analysis data. Human society has demonstrated remarkable adaptability. Civilian populations have successfully transitioned to wartime production. Military training has been expanded to include virtually all adult individuals, and their industrial capacity has actually increased during the conflict. More importantly, added General Crothon, they're no longer fighting defensively. Human forces have begun conducting offensive operations against Kalefron positions with increasing frequency and effectiveness. Admiral HFY activated tactical displays showing recent human operations. 3 days ago, human forces conducted a coordinated assault on 17 separate Kalefron installations simultaneously. They achieved their objectives in 14 cases, withdrew successfully from all positions, and captured significant amounts of Kael'thran equipment and personnel. Personnel. The fleet admiral's voice carried deadly calm. Yes, sir. Human forces are now taking Kael'thran prisoners for interrogation and intelligence gathering. They have demonstrated capability to penetrate our security protocols and extract tactical information from capture equipment. The implications hung in the air like toxic gas. The humans were not just surviving the Kael'thran invasion, they were learning from it. Sir, Intelligence Director Voxmira spoke carefully. There's something else. We've decoded human communications referring to what they call Phase 3, which is, we believe they are preparing to take the conflict beyond Earth's surface. Fleet Admiral Morthak turned sharply. Explain. Human engineers have been working on spacecraft designs based on captured Kael'thran technology. They appear to be developing the capability for interplanetary operations. Admiral Zexhai felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. Sir, I request permission to speak freely. Granted. The Kael'thran Empire has never encountered a species like humanity. We have assumed that all primitive species share certain characteristics: limited military capacity, predictable tactical responses, and inevitable surrender when faced with superior force. Humans possess none of these characteristics. Continue. Sir, humanity appears to be a species that has evolved specifically for warfare. Not just individual combat, but large-scale, prolonged military operations under adverse conditions. Their entire civilization is designed around the assumption that they will face existential threats requiring total mobilization. General Crothon nodded grimly. They don't just fight wars. They are war. Their politics, economics, technology, and social structures are all optimized for military conflict. And now, added Intelligence Director Voxmira, they're applying everything they have learned from fighting us to the development of interstellar warfare capability. Fleet Admiral Morthak stood in silence, processing the unthinkable. Are you suggesting that continued operations against Earth could result in humans becoming a threat to other Imperial territories? Sir, Admiral Zexhai said, I am suggesting that continued operations could result in humans becoming a threat to the Empire itself. The war room fell silent except for the hum of electronic systems. On the displays, Earth continued to rotate, its surface now scarred by a year of warfare, but still inhabited by a species that refused to acknowledge defeat. Recommendations? The fleet admiral asked. Admiral Zexhai had spent months preparing for this moment. Sir, I recommend immediate withdrawal of all Kael'thran forces from Earth and designation of the human species as a protected but monitored civilization. Protected? Sir, we cannot defeat them without destroying the planet entirely, which would eliminate any economic benefit from conquest. We cannot occupy them without committing resources that exceed the value of their territory. And we cannot ignore them without risking the development of a pure military threat. So we declare them off limits, and hope they remain satisfied with their single world? No, sir. We establish diplomatic contact and attempt to understand their intentions. More importantly, we learn from them. Fleet Admiral Morthak stared at the tactical displays for long moments. Learn what? How to fight like they do, sir. The Kael'thran Empire has conquered 17 star systems against species that fought conventionally. We have never faced an enemy that treats warfare as an existential lifestyle rather than a temporary political tool. If there are other species like humanity in the galaxy, we need to understand their methods. The fleet admiral turned to his assembled staff. Consensus. One by one, the military leaders of the Kael'thran Empire acknowledged what none of them had expected to face: a primitive species that had taught them the limits of their own power. Initiate withdrawal procedures, Fleet Admiral Morthak commanded. All ships and personnel will be extracted from Earth orbit within 72 hours. As the orders went out across the fleet, Admiral Zexhai returned to his quarters and activated a personal communication to the human military command. General Seraph Chun appeared on the display. her expression showing no surprise at receiving the call. "Admiral," she said, "I assume you're calling to discuss terms." "General, the Kalefern Empire is withdrawing from Earth. Your species will be left in peace." "For now." "What do you mean?" General Chun smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "Admiral, we spent the last year learning everything we could about your empire. Your technology, your tactics, your territories, and your weaknesses. Did you think you would simply forget this education?" Admiral Zexhai felt a chill that reached his core. "You're planning to retaliate." "We're planning to explore," she corrected. "The galaxy is a big place, and we've learned there are other species out there. Some of them might need protection from empires that think strength gives them the right to conquer whoever they choose." The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Zexhai staring at the viewport where Earth continued its eternal rotation. The Kalefern Empire had come to conquer a primitive world and add it to their collection of subject territories. Instead, they had awakened something that would ensure they never felt safe again. Humanity had learned to reach for the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same.